Looking at songs that soothe, for the last time I'll tell you that psalms are Jewish songs, and they're songs with a distinctive purpose. The psalms are vehicles to convey the feelings and attitude of any worshiper in a similar situation. We who find ourselves in different kinds of circumstances can use the psalms as means whereby we kind of try to figure out how to approach God. It can be difficult. When we're happy and things are going well, approaching God is not that difficult. When we're not in those situations, sometimes we need help. And fortunately, the Psalms are very honest, very straightforward, and we can use them to kind of learn how to approach God when things are dicey. There's a handful of Psalms that are identified with specific events in David's life. I was going to look at one and chose not to. Made a decision that there is a Psalm that is, it doesn't have an inscription. It doesn't tell us when it was written, but understanding what David came from, that he was a shepherd, it's difficult not to do Psalm 23. A couple of reasons why. I think it gives us the largest window into David's heart. And so when David thinks about God, he thinks about him as a shepherd. And David understands shepherds. So I think Psalm 23 then captures a lot for us. It tells us a lot about David's soul. Another thing, it's probably the most beloved of all the Psalms, the most relevant to us. We learn in it how to approach God in times of agitation. Look with me in the sheet on the back side of the handout. Psalm 23 is written out. Let's read it. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not be in want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Just to land on a couple of the statements here, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not be in want. Literally, I won't lack anything. And when you look in the Bible, the mark of a good shepherd is to anticipate and supply for the sheep's wants and needs. That's why in the Bible, you don't hear them talk a lot about bad sheep. You hear them talk about bad shepherds, because the amount of responsibility that a shepherd has to take for the sheep, if there's a problem with the sheep, it's not the sheep's problem, it's the shepherd's problem. If the sheep lacks something, it's because the shepherd didn't provide it. Sheep cannot provide for themselves. They require the most care of any domestic animal. Any kind of animal you're trying to raise, sheep are not they're not self-sufficient at all. And therefore, when it says, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall lack nothing, that says something about the shepherd who puts himself in a position to be able to provide for everything that the sheep need. And before we talk about good and bad shepherds and good and bad sheep, let's make some other observations from the psalm. It says, he makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. When it talks about green pastures, the word pastures, it's a word that is translated pasture, but literally it's resting places. And so what it indicates here, it's not so much that God, that the shepherd makes the sheep lie down, but where he makes the sheep lie down. He makes me lie down in verdant pastures, places that are able to provide rest. Not all ground that a shepherd would take sheep through provide the opportunity for rest. If it's brown and it's not shady, then the sheep can't rest there. But this shepherd, the good shepherd, the one that David talks about, he makes me lie down in rich, lush pastures. So ones that can support rest. It says he leads me beside resting water. Again, the similar word, the water is not flowing quickly, so you'd have a hard time drinking from it. It's resting water. Resting water, places that you can rest. That's what the shepherd makes the sheep lie down in these places. It says he restores my soul. To restore is literally to turn back. So the soul went this way, and he restores my soul. He turns it back this way. And where did it go? into agitation. Sheep are easily spooked and easily agitated. And so when it says restoring the soul, it's saying the soul is going to go from a resting place to a non-resting place. That's not hard for us to understand. What is it that causes your soul to become restless? Some of us, it's job issues, relational issues, health issues. We're all triggered by something, and our soul goes from resting to restless. And what he does, he turns back the soul into a place where it can rest once more. And we'll think about and talk about how a shepherd does that. It says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, death is not literally in here. Even though I walk through a dark valley, a shadowy place. It's a dark place, and certainly death would be a place like that, but it doesn't say death explicitly. It says, even though I walk in dark shadow. And so it's not just death that he walks with us in. It's dark places. Places that are associated with the terrors of darkness, the possibility of injury, the possibility of being the subject of foul play. There's all kinds of things that can be dark, not just death. Now, he walks with us through the valley of the shadow of death, but that's not the only place we need a shepherd. It is a place where we need a shepherd, but there's all kinds of dark places. There can be the darkness of mental problems, not just the darkness of health issues, the darkness of vocational problems, the darkness of relational problems, scary places. Scary places. Watch with us in those places. It says, even though I walk in those places, I will fear no evil. I won't be afraid of calamity or misery or distress or injury. And here's why. Number one, because you're with me. And a lot of the places that we go to, the reason why they're so scary is because we feel alone. Would you agree with me? It's not as frightening to be in a scary place if you're not by yourself. Right? That makes sense, doesn't it? You know, it takes the heat off. If you go through a scary place, a scary time. And if you go through with other people, it's not as scary. The thing that makes dark places terrifying is when we are alone, isolated. I remember once I had to I'll tell a sob story. Yeah, when I grew up, I didn't have a car when I went to work, and it was in high school, and I worked at Lum's Restaurant, about 2.5 miles away. And so naturally, we didn't have a bunch of cars, so I walked there, or I'd get dropped off, and sometimes I'd get off at 1:30 in the morning, 2 in the morning, and I had to walk home, which not a big deal in those days. Except I lived on Water Street. Water Street is a street out in the wooded area. And there is a stretch. There's a street light around a corner, and there's a street light around another corner, and there is a 1/4 mile of pitch blackness. And it's in that dark place that, usually, and I'm fine. A lot of lights, stuff like that. Come to that place. And I always ran that stretch. And it was about another 1/4 mile away from home, so woof, I ran into this. And if I had been walking with somebody, it wouldn't have been as scary. But naturally, you don't get a bunch of people to walk you home at 2:30 in the morning. I will feel no evil because you're with me. It says, your rod and staff console me. The rod of a shepherd is something that they use as it's a club. And there's a number of things that a shepherd could do to protect the sheep. And the rod is one of them. It's like a club you can beat things with. Now, you don't use a club on sheep. And that's part of the thing we'll see about a shepherd. Use a club on things you want to get away from the sheep. Another thing you use is a slingshot. That's what David was great with, a slingshot. Wham! And he could protect the sheep from all kinds of things. And again, if you're out in a dark place, it would be easier for me if the person I'm walking with was a tough guy walking down that stretch of road. Now, if it's Casper Milquetoast, that's not going to help me a bunch if me and Casper are walking down that thing, because he's going to get he's going to get trounced. But if I have somebody, some oomph to him, that's an easier thing to do. And that's what a shepherd uses a club to be able to provide protection. And then his rod and staff, sometimes you don't need to be protected, you need to be provided for. I've heard a lot of things about the staff. If sheep have these little legs, and if they end up, if they end up on their back, it's like, so they're on their back, and they're kind of big here, and they got little legs, and so when they're on their back, there's not a great ability to turn themselves over. And so what a sheep would do sometimes is get the crook of the staff and do that. Sometimes the staff was used to direct, and sheep require rescuing and direction. So rod and staff provide protection and guidance and direction. So I won't be afraid of calamity, misery, distress, or injury because you're with me. You know how to take care of threats, and you know how to provide guidance. It says, and you arrange a place to eat in front of my oppressors. When it talks about in the presence of my enemies, the word for enemy here is somebody who puts you in a place where you lack options. They back you into a corner. That's the image of an enemy here. It's not a person who chases someone, but a person who backs someone into a corner. Now again, if you're a sheep and you're backed into a corner, you're not very scary. Like if there's some animals, you back them into a corner, they're scary. But a sheep is not one of them. I mean, what's a sheep going to do? Bleat? There's not much scary about that. So if you're cornering a sheep in a corner, and that's what the oppressors are, people who back you into a corner. And there are those people, again, that's the thing about difficult places. It's places where you don't have a lot of options. There's not a lot of choices. And in those places, what it says is that the shepherd he lays out a leather mat, which is a table if you are a shepherd. So you lay out this leather mat if you want to provide something other than grass, and you put stuff on the leather mat, and then you eat from this place. And it says he provides a table before me in the presence of my enemies. So even when you're in a place where you're looking at a lack of options, you look in front of you and he's set out a meal. My cup overflows, it's well filled. That's why he says, surely goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life. You ever have a dog that's really cute? Love the dog. And you ran here and the dog nips at your heels, so he kind of is playful, and it's not the kind of dog that you're afraid he's chasing you. It's cute, and he kind of gets at your feet, and it says goodness and love will pursue me, chase me, nip at my heels. It's when you're going through life and you look behind you and the thing that's chasing you is goodness and kindness. You can't get away from it. You get backed in the corner. Goodness and kindness is nipping at your heels. And you're going through that stretch of road on Water Street, and goodness and kindness is nipping at your heels. And that's what it indicates. Because you have a shepherd, you won't lack anything. And protection, provision, all the kind of things that we need. It says, I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. When it says dwell, the same word, turn back. The thing about Psalm 23, it assumes that you're going to stray. You're going to stray from restlessness to agitation, and he's going to turn you back. You're going to stray from his house, and he's going to turn you back so that you remain at his house. Why is this psalm so beloved? Why? I thought about that. You don't have to be a religious person to really like Psalm 23. I had a couple thoughts. One thing, I think, it's like the new covenant in that there's no ifs. A lot of times the Psalms, there's a phrase that says, if you're upright in heart, and then you go, oh, there goes that psalm. It doesn't apply to me. I'm not upright in heart, but it doesn't say anything about having to be upright in heart. And again, in this psalm, there's no ifs. There's nothing to paint you out of the picture. You don't have to be upright or not upright. It doesn't say you have to be anything. It's not about you. It's about the shepherd and about what you get because of who the shepherd is, not because of who you are. And I think that's why anyone can hear this and paint themselves into the picture. nothing to disqualify us. In that sense, it's unconditional. It really is like the new covenant. Again, the old covenant indicates if you obey, you'll be blessed. If you disobey, you'll be cursed. And the new covenant is different because there's no ifs. You look at Jeremiah or Hebrews, where it has what the new covenant is, and I will be their God, and they will be my people. I'll put my law in their mind and write it on their heart. I'll forgive their wickedness, be helios to their wickedness, remember their sins no more. There's no if you, it's all I will. Nothing to paint you out of the picture. And it's the covenant that Jesus came to establish. In the Bible, I mention this, and this is really what you get. Shepherds carry the load, not sheep. Shepherds carry the load, not sheep. And that's why Jesus, when he talks about shepherds and sheep, he talks mostly about bad shepherds versus good shepherds. He doesn't say much. In fact, you remember Jesus saying anything about bad sheep? Black sheep? Anything? How about bad shepherds? Yeah, Jesus doesn't blow up sheep. He blows up shepherds. The target of criticism in the Bible is shepherds, not sheep. Again, not bad sheep, but bad shepherds. It's true in both the Old and New Testament. Look what it says in Ezekiel 34. It's in your worship folder. This is what the sovereign Lord says. Woe to the shepherds of Israel. Here we go. Now, again, the sheep were not doing really well in Israel. But he doesn't blow up the sheep. He blows up the shepherds. And that's what he says. Woe to the shepherds of Israel who will only take care of themselves. Should not shepherds take care of the flock? You eat the curds, clothe yourselves with the wool, and slaughter the choice animals, but you do not care of the flock. Do not take care of the flock. You have not strengthened the weak, or healed the sick, or bound up the injured. You have not brought back the strays, or searched for the lost. You have ruled them harshly and brutally. So, they were scattered because there was no shepherd. And when they were scattered, they became food for all the wild animals. My sheep wandered over all the mountains and on every high hill. They were scattered over the whole earth, and no one searched or looked for them. Against this backdrop, now this is why Jesus says what he says. The Son of Man came to seek and save what was lost. And here's the image. When he says the Son of Man came to seek and save what was lost, it's sheep who have been neglected. And because they're neglected, they're running all over the place, but nobody's searching for them. And Jesus comes and he says, finally, I am the good shepherd. I have come to seek and save what was lost. Lost because of bad shepherds. When it talks about bad shepherds, that's what it means when it talks about sheep in wolves' clothing. I've talked about that before in the Bugs Bunny cartoons or Ralph the Sheepdog. And is it Ralph the Sheepdog and Wile E. Coyote, I think. I think that's the one. Wile E. Coyote, he has the black legs, the real thin black legs, and he puts the sheep thing on, and then he goes in and then he grabs, he got and he you see him just with the sheep, and he's out of there, and then Ralph the Sheepdog busts him, and so I love cartoons. But a wolf in sheep's clothing is not a wolf, not a coyote dressed up like a sheep. It's a coyote dressed up like a shepherd. A wolf in sheep's clothing are wolves that dress themselves in the clothing provided by wool. And that's not a sheep, it's a shepherd. They put wool garments on, and that's what it's describing. A wolf in sheep's clothing is a wolf dressed up like a shepherd who is not there to care for the flock, but to feed off of the flock. And that's what happened. They take the choice things, so they're in positions of leadership, not because they're providing care, but because they have developed a love of MLTs, mutton, lettuce, and tomato sandwiches. Mutton with okay. Not just that. They just don't care for the flock. And that's the image. The absence of a good shepherd Well, listen to what Jesus said. Jesus went through all the towns and villages teaching in their synagogues, preaching the good news of the kingdom, healing every disease and sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them. And the interesting thing, when the religious leaders in that day saw the crowd, they had contempt. These irreligious people. Jesus didn't have contempt, he had compassion. And this is why. Because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. When he looked at a crowd of people, harassed is literally, the image is flayed, the skin flayed off. Now it's not that they were skinned, but they were troubled. If you're flayed, a lot of things are going to trouble you. And that's the way he saw them, easily troubled. That's what sheep are like, easily troubled. And helpless, harassed, helpless. It's the sheep lying on the ground, unable to rescue themselves, pray. If a sheep's lying on the ground with its stomach exposed, it's a meal waiting to happen. And so when Jesus looked at people, he said, these people are troubled and helpless. Now, why are they troubled and helpless? Because they're bad people. No, because they don't have a shepherd. So when he looks at individuals, that's his diagnosis, the lack of a shepherd. And that's why he was compassionate. Hit the next slide. How do you distinguish between good and bad shepherds? I'm going to read a couple of verses. See if you can pick it up. Here's what Jesus said. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. You got that in your mind? My yoke is easy, my burden is light. So take my yoke upon you. It's not heavy. Now, contrast that with what it says in Matthew 23, where he talks about, let me read it. Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, the teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. That's a seat of religious authority. It's like when the Pope, we'll get a new Pope, speaks ex cathedra. He speaks out of the cathedra in a position of authority, and he speaks on God's behalf. So when it says they sit in Moses' seat, they sit in the seat of authority. And this is what Jesus says about them. So you must obey them because of their station, and do everything they tell you, but do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach. They tie up heavy loads and put them on men's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to lift a finger. Hit the slide, John. What we find, good shepherds take the load from sheep, bad shepherds place the load on sheep. That's the difference between a good and bad shepherd. And if you come out of a place, and again, the good shepherd is Jesus. And we can reflect him or not reflect him accurately. He's the good shepherd. There's under shepherds. So when you go into a place, you can know whether they are close to or not close to Jesus, the good shepherd, depending on how you walk out. If you walk out and you feel like you've had a ton of bricks put on your shoulder, that's not a good sign. Because bad shepherds put the load on sheep. That's what Jesus said. You put a load on men's shoulder, but are really not willing to lift a finger. Because the thing about a bad shepherds put the blame on sheep. What's the problem? It's your problem. See, you're the problem. It's not that you don't have a caring shepherd, it's that you're stupid sheep. And the deal with the bad shepherd, he'll blame the sheep. And a good shepherd understands it's really not the responsibility of the sheep to take care of themselves because he knows they can't. So a good shepherd understands the level of care that the sheep require. That's why a good shepherd will never blame the sheep. They'll blame the shepherds. It's the shepherds. Sheep can't care for themselves, and a good shepherd knows that. Good shepherds will talk about bad shepherds. Bad shepherds will talk about bad. I'm going to say that again. Good shepherds will talk about bad. Bad shepherds will talk about bad. That's it. That's it. So if you're in a place and you're getting nailed and you come out like this, I don't think that's a place you should go back to in a religious context. Get out of there. And because that shepherd is not, now I'm not saying he's I don't know, but he's not Jesus. Not what Jesus does. Not what good shepherds do. Spiritual leadership is to be gentle. Jesus says, I'm gentle and humble in heart. Do you know why a shepherd is gentle? Why is a shepherd gentle? Because they understand sheep. See, if you're a shepherd, you don't say, oh, I can't believe. There's green pasture and there's brown pasture. And where does the sheep go? Over in the brown pasture. Stoop, get over. No, the shepherd understands that sheep, they don't make real good decisions. And you know what Jesus calls you? Sheep. But we've had people tell us that when we make bad decisions, he throws things at us. And you know who told us that? Who told us that? Bad shepherds. Bad sheep. Bad sheep. Bad shepherd. Spiritual leadership is supposed to be gentle. In fact, you know what the main task of a shepherd is? The main task of a shepherd doesn't happen when they're in a difficult spot. It happens before that. The main job of a shepherd is to cultivate responsiveness. It's to cultivate responsiveness in the sheep. Look what it says in John 10, 3 through 5. He calls out his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they no. Why do they know his voice? Why do they know his voice? Because he caused them to know his voice. That's the work he had to do. To have a sheep know your voice takes a lot of work. You have to put them in places, and you have to develop within them a trust in the voice. Now, whose responsibility is that? The sheep's or the shepherd's? It's the shepherd's. And a bad shepherd won't take the time to cultivate voice recognition. And if a sheep doesn't recognize the voice of the shepherd, what's going to happen when they get in a place and they're confused? And the shepherd says, come here. Are they going to come here? No. And why won't they come here? Because they're bad sheep, right? No. It's the shepherd didn't create voice recognition. It's the shepherd's fault. And that's why Jesus says, my sheep hear my voice. And they follow me. Why? Because he builds that in. He builds it in. That's what it means to be a good shepherd. Good shepherd understands that the sheep will deal with agitation. That's what he knows. God knows that about you, by the way. He knows you get agitated. And you know what he knows when you get agitated? You make lousy decisions. And when he sees you make lousy decisions, he doesn't take the club and say, give me the slingshot. That's a bad shepherd. Jesus understands. When you get upset, you make bad decisions. You know what he tries to do? Call you by name. And we're gonna talk about why doesn't that work? Why doesn't that work for us? But it is what he does, and he builds that in. A good shepherd deals with physical dangers and with emotional distress. You know how he deals with emotional distress? With his voice. Come. Come. You know what they say about if there's different flocks of sheep at a watering hole, and there's different shepherds having lunch, that the shepherd comes up and he says a word. And his sheep, because they know his voice, they'll look up and they'll follow him. Why will they follow him? What do they associate his voice with? Why? Okay, here's a question. Why will a sheep heed the shepherd's voice. Why? It's associated with safety, nurture, provision, protection. Does a shepherd have to put a gun to the head of the sheep to get them to follow? No, because he's done the hard work. Done the hard work. You know that's the way God sees you? Why don't we follow him? We do and we don't. We'll talk about that. In this respect, straying sheep. So if you've got a flock of sheep and they're going all over creation, they're everywhere. You know, they're getting caught in fences and there's some on their back, and so it's a mess. When you look at a flock of sheep like that, and you're assessing what is really supposed to be happening, whose fault is that? The shepherd's. What? They don't even know his voice. He's out there saying, "Hey," and they ignore you. You know what? The work hasn't been done. It's a shepherd's deal. It says in it doesn't relate to his own sheep. It says in John 10:16, "I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd." There's not one voice for insiders and another voice for outsiders. Some people say that when you're calling people to faith in Christ, you've got to blow them up. You know, there's this whole thing, the way of the master, that you really have to put the load on people and make them feel like miserable sinners before they'll come to Christ. No. Because it's not one voice for the insiders and one voice for the outsiders. Somebody outside of religion, they're irreligious. Why are they irreligious? Could it be that they've been under the influence of bad shepherds and they associate God with, are you going to willingly follow somebody who's going to blow you up when you make a mistake? Are you? No. And that's why the same call to the insiders is the same call to the outsiders. People want to be cared for. And you know why we know that? That's why you don't have to be a religious person to like Psalm 23. You read this at funerals, or you read it, and people, it's like that thing with footprints. You don't have to be a really religious person to like footprints. You know why? Everybody wants a guide. No one likes to feel alone. I got a question. How many spiritual problems are related to not bad hearing on the part of sheep, but bad speaking on the part of shepherds? How many spiritual problems are related to people claiming to speak for God, but doing so harshly? How many spiritual problems are related to people misrepresenting the shepherd's voice? I would say all. Watch what you listen to. It's more impactful than you might think. I remember I was in China. I was at a conference, and I came out feeling lousy. Just, oh, gosh, like I had spiritual indigestion. And I felt terrible about myself and terrible about ministry, and, geez, I'm not doing anything good. And then I had to think, where have I been? What? I feel awful. And then I remembered this. I just heard a talk. And then I started to think about what I heard. And then I remember hearing, a lot of it wasn't gentle. But I just drank it in. I drank it in and I metabolized it and I felt, but I said, what's the problem? Who did I think the problem was with? Me. What's the problem with me? And then we ended up saying, wait a minute. I just have been slimed. I just have inhaled this thing. And once I understood that, I went, and I just spiritual and got it out. And then I felt, but you know what? And that's kind of a crass analogy. I think we need to take that kind of stuff seriously. Watch out what you listen to. Not playing around. Sacred misrepresentation is far more dangerous than secular stuff. This stuff about get $1 million and go for all the gospel, yeah, okay, fine. The real tricky stuff is somebody who claims to speak for God and misrepresents him. That's the stuff that goes in. That's the stuff. You'll end up careening towards all this other stuff. And you'll never understand that it wasn't the secular lure, it was the sacred misrepresentation, far more dangerous. And that's why Jesus speaks about bad shepherds rather than bad sheep. Harsh voice is not the shepherd's voice. Harshness doesn't work in times of agitation. Jesus said, last verse, my sheep listen to my voice, I know them and they follow me. I give them eternal life and they shall never perish. No one can snatch them out of my hand. My Father who has given them to me is greater than all. No one can snatch them out of the Father's hand. I and the Father are one. You'd think this whole thing about gentle, and you'd think that would be easy to put our arms around. You know what Paul had a really hard time with? His gentleness. And so Paul was pretty gentle with people, and then people walked in after Paul, and they said, okay, Paul, he really can't be as harsh as you need for him to be. And they'd say, and he can't be harsh because he doesn't have the authority to do so. And then these, no joke, these spiritual leaders would come on Paul's heels, and they would come into a church, and they'd say, now let's get busy. Now Paul's gone, right? They'll take his place. It's about time we got you guys going. This is what they do. In Corinth, they actually did this because Paul talks about it. And they went, this guy who was having some kind of problem, and they got down, and they slapped him in the face. Now, Paul would never do that, would he? That's the way religion happens. And you know what the people did? They tuned it out, right? They drank it in like water. They said, in fact, I know somebody who came here, went elsewhere. Again, people come here and go elsewhere. That happens all the time. And what the person said, sometimes I need a punch in the nose, spiritually. You know what the deal is? No, you don't. Because a punch in the nose is not going to help you in times of agitation, is it? And that's what we need. We need something that works in times of agitation. And a punch in the nose isn't going to do it. Not going to do it. And that's the problem. Paul had a tough time being gentle. He didn't start off gentle, but when he came to Christ, he understood, wait a minute. That's not the way he works. And people accused him of being weak. In Jesus' day, harshness was not overt. Again, bad shepherds, I'm not talking about bad people. Because sometimes, in fact, you know what ends up happening? When a shepherd goes out to tend a flock of sheep, tell me what will happen. When a shepherd who was tending a flock of sheep forgot to take lunch, and if they're out long enough, what are they going to end up having to do? Consume something. And in a spiritual thing, you know what happens sometimes? People in positions of spiritual leadership, they make people obey so that they can feel full. Do you get that? If I get a bunch of numbers and if I can make you behave, how does that make me feel? Well, I must be pretty okay. That feels satisfying. If I'm not getting my stuff from him, you know what I'm going to get it from? You. Obey. Perk up. Oh, that feels pretty good. I can make you obey. And that's, you know what that's called? A wolf in sheep's clothing. Consuming the devotion of the flock. And it doesn't feel bad because they're not bad people. It's just, in fact, wolves don't hate sheep. Right? They just need to eat them to live. They don't hate them. Difference between bad sheep and good sheep. It says, Ezekiel 34, I myself will judge between the fat sheep and the lean sheep, because you shove with flank and shoulder, butting all the weak sheep with your horns until you have driven them away. I will save my flock, and they will no longer be plundered. I will judge between one sheep and another. I will place over them one shepherd, my servant David, and he will tend them. Again, David is a shepherd. They're going to put somebody over the sheep like David. And by the way, who is that? Who is the king that's from the lineage of David? Jesus. He's the shepherd, the good shepherd, one who's like David. But in terms of implicating the sheep, Randy, come on up. Say this is a watering hole. And
we didn't rehearse this.
So here we are, and there's enough, but I would really want to make sure that I get my so what I end up doing is kind of butting Randy out of the way a little bit. Oh yeah. But then there's Randy's the kind of person I would want to walk with on that stretch of Water Street. He's like, okay. But that's the problem. That's bad sheep and good sheep, and we hoard. So rather than there's enough water for everyone, I want to make sure I get all the water I want. We're basically selfish, and that distinguishes bad from good sheep. And that's the problem. The implication is that, wait a minute, it's like you're trampling all the water. You're trampling the water, and no one can drink after you go in because it's like you're in there rooting around and you're putting up mud, and then somebody comes in after you and goes, geez. And then you're just going, oh, well, I got to drink. By the way, why do we do that? Why do we do that? Why do we have to have what we want? Let me tell you why you have to have what you want. Because you're bad sheep, right? Bad sheep, right? No, I don't think that's it at all. But it says, this is the last verse. Why would Jesus say this? Do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions, give to the poor. Provide purses for yourself that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven that will not be exhausted, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Tell me what's up with a sheep who needs to get it all now. They don't understand that the Father has been pleased to give them the kingdom. Little flock. Little flock. Little flock. Your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. You don't need to get it all now. Step out of the way and let some people have some stuff. Your time is coming and it's not now. You understand how this works? What is it that a person who needs to have it now? Well, why do we do that? Because we forgot that the Lord is our shepherd. We shall not want. He makes us lie down in green pastures. He leads us beside quiet waters. He restores our soul. He leads us in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, we will fear no evil, for he is with us. His rod and his staff, they comfort us. He provides a table before us in the presence of our enemies. Our cup overflows. Surely goodness and loving kindness will follow us all the days of our life. And we will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. What would happen if we put that more in the center of our brain? You know what we would stop doing? Butting other sheep out of the way. A couple of slides. I'm going to show you this quick. You know what the building blocks of security are? This is a shepherd and a sheep, a mother and a daughter, a creator and his creation, cooperation. There's times we're neither to be a mother or a father. Helicopter moms. And the kid, he can't even get a breath. And that's not cooperation, to never allow enough space. But the opposite of a helicopter mom or dad is a spaceship parent. Up in the planet Soothe or something. So neither one of those is cooperation. Cooperation is being close enough, but not so close as to restrict. Acceptance. Sometimes children, they want to be loved and nurtured. Acceptance is the willingness to provide the child, the infant, with what they need. Cooperation, acceptance, sensitivity. The way kids send signals is not always clean. What do kids do when they are hungry and afraid? Do they act afraid? No, they act like they're mad or angry, and a sensitive mother will understand. I know that cry. That's not a mad cry. That's a scared cry, and they're sensitive to the cues. God is sensitive to your cues. Now, he understands why you roam around, and he understands what you need. It's sensitive and available. You've got to be able to be there. When those things are in place, cooperation, acceptance, sensitivity, availability, and by the way, that describes a shepherd. Next slide. These are the things that are the byproducts of security. These are in place when the mental representation is of someone who's going to be there. There's a relationship built. There's voice recognition, self-esteem. See, if I value someone and they're with me, I feel pretty good about me. Not because I can do everything, but because I don't have to do anything because they're with me. Self-control. If I am confident that you're with me and that you're going to provide for me, my needs and desires don't consume me. I can feel hungry, but then say, I'll get fed. I'll get fed. Self-esteem, self-control, mastery. When somebody is with me and I don't have to watch out for myself, I can study things. I can learn. I can read. I can develop musical gifts. Because I don't have to learn and watch my back at the same time. Mastery. And you know what else? Empathy. A person who has been cared for is a person who cares for others. Would you agree with me that those things summarize healthy spirituality? Here's where they come from. Understanding that we have a shepherd who will never leave us and forsake us. That's where that comes from. It's the relationship with, it says, don't be afraid, little flock. Your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. You know what's determinative here? Who's the good shepherd? Who's the good shepherd? Jesus says, I'm the good shepherd. You know what Jesus also said? I and the Father are. Do you know who else is the good shepherd? The Father. The Father and the Son are the same. And sometimes we feel safe with Jesus, but the Father, he's a bad shepherd. You've got to watch out for him. But Jesus, as long as you got Jesus in front of the Father, you know what? That doesn't work. It says, don't be afraid, little flock. Who has been pleased to give you the kingdom? Which one? Father or Son? Father. You know what our problem? Part of the reason is we think Jesus speaks with one voice and the Father speaks with another. In fact, I would dare say most problems, many spiritual problems, have to do with a distinction in people's minds between Father and Son. The Son is nice. The Father, whoa. And it's the Father that we don't want to stand before. But you know what the deal is? The Father is exactly like the Son. And that's why we need to understand it's not just Jesus, it's the Father. He's been pleased to give you the kingdom. The Father feels about you the way the Son does. You don't need to be afraid to come before God the Father. He is exactly like Jesus is. And if he has been painted with black, that was a bad shepherd that did that. When it comes to spiritual influence, gentleness is non-negotiable. Worship team, come up. You're going to sing a last song. Jesus said, I and the Father are one. Do this for me. When it comes to spiritual influence, develop two things. Develop a good yes and a good no. Somebody claims to represent God and misrepresents, say, No. When somebody reflects God and the Father is gentle, say yes, but be discerning, because there are bad shepherds. Let me pray for us. Father, you're not surprised when we become agitated. You expect it. You don't throw up your hands into frustration and despair. You don't kick something. You understand that we're sheep. You understand that we get easily frustrated, easily agitated, and that doesn't surprise you. You would have us listen to your voice and develop a mental representation of you as being cooperative and accepting, sensitive and available. A voice that we can listen to when we're agitated, that doesn't curse us, that doesn't shame us, that doesn't guilt us, but that soothes us, calms us, allows us to think. Again, that we do walk through shadowy places, scary places, and you would walk through those places with us and help us to learn to trust you. And again, we're somewhere on that road. No one of us trusts you. We all have issues. We get easily triggered, and that's okay. I guess what I'd ask is you would help us to identify what is your voice and which isn't. Develop within us discernment so that we could cultivate a relationship with you. We could understand your voice and develop a capacity to trust you even in dark places. In Jesus' name, amen. Glad you came. Hope you come next week. We'll talk about the unshakable kingdom.